Let's get the obvious thing out of the way first. Yes, Tokusatsu is, by its very nature, a low-budget filmmaking style. One, if there's money to be saved, you can guarantee it will be low budget and then some. Is this an issue? Objectively, yes, but that could be said about any piece of media regardless of how big its budget is. And you'll see as we go through, budget is not something that I think matters all that much. I mean, the entire reason Tokusatsu as we know it today exists in the first place was because suitmation was created as a cost-cutting measure on the original Gojira, replacing the initial idea to have the creature portrayed with stop motion like the beast that inspired it. Over the decades, with the advancement of filmmaking techniques and technology as a whole, things that were once impossible due to their costs have become commonplace. Even with technology improving, Japanese TV and cinema has always been a few steps behind international productions. National production in the 70s, for instance, were underperforming drastically compared to the flashy spectacles of imported films and television, with tokusatsu such as the aforementioned Godzilla series suffered greatly because of it. They were simply unable to keep up, reflected in the dwindling audiences of each subsequent film. On the TV side of things, specifically, things were admittedly looking brighter. The 70s and 80s saw the most variety of tokusatsu projects of any time period, none of which had massive amounts of money thrown at them, yet they persisted. Some of the ideas spawned from this era were very experimental, but the lack of budget didn't stop them from coming thick and fast. This is likely one of the most obvious things I've ever said on this channel, but the only limit to a story is the writer's imaginations, at least during the show's planning phases, making budget a non-issue. Skipping ahead 20 years or so, we find ourselves in the 2000s, a time when all the major tokusatsu franchises were back in full swing. During this time, a different form of experimentation was taking place, that of the newly emerging technologies mentioned before. Shows and films were taking advantage of the more accepted and commonplace implementation of CGI, which in a lot of these early cases were used to fully replace things that previously were done using suits or props, which, you know, haven't exactly held up over time. Even aside from that, it's still obvious that the medium was lagging behind its foreign competition. Compare the CG in, say, Kuga to The Matrix and the difference is night and day. I mean, yeah, that's not exactly a fair comparison, so what about Godzilla 1998 compared to Godzilla 2000? Neither film's CGI is particularly amazing, but one has clearly had more money involved. As we've continued to move on, there have been definite improvements to both the tried and true practical side of tokusatsu, along with that of the CGI enhancements. Pair these with the focal points on pushing toys, adding a larger sum of money to the series fund. Because yes, the money being made from the toys is used for something worthwhile and not just because Bandai are greedy. And you have yourself pretty sizable budgets to work with for more recent toku productions. Especially nowadays, it's clear when a certain tokusatsu has had a significantly increased budget compared to what they were working with previously. You only need to look at the most recent mainline Ultraman shows to see the proof. Speaking of Ultraman, given its giant scale nature has always required it having a new miniature set with props, buildings, lighting, and explosives for every episode. Not to mention the kaiju and ultra suits, the need to sell the scale of the battles and all other human scenes. The franchise has always had to work within larger but tighter budgets than the likes of Rider, Sentai, or other shows like them that can just, well, go outside. Comparatively, Toei's toku output has always been made a lot cheaper than Tsuburaya's, ultimately making them more profitable. Of course, that doesn't make them better shows automatically for that, but it's just worth mentioning. The difference between the two studios' output in similar sequences, i.e. the Ultra fights and the Sentai Mecha fights, really does put into perspective where either studio's priorities are into allocating the budgets. Not that I'm saying one does it better or anything, but again, it's just worth pointing out. Another thing I think is worth addressing is another very obvious thing that's worth remembering. A majority of tokusatsu is aimed at a younger audience. And let's face it, when we were all kids, we didn't really care how good or bad what we were watching was because we didn't know any better. Of course, we should be making products the best they can be, no matter what age range. But at the same time, kids aren't gonna hold things to the same standards we old people are. That being said, I'm sure we've all looked back on something we watched as kids at a very surface level to see if it was good as we remembered. And in some cases, the answer is no, or even, why did I even like this in the first place? To some people, this response may come from looking back on Power Rangers or Godzilla in the way they look, but hey, that's fine. Admittedly, some of this mentality may stem from viewing more Western media that doesn't look favorably at Tokusatsu media and making it the butt of the joke just for how cheap it looks. But now we're approaching dangerous territories, so I think we should move on before I reach the point of no return. But Marcosatsu, what about Tokusatsu specifically made for adults? Surely they have bigger budgets to appeal to more adult standards. Well, you'd be right. You can just tell by looking at Tokusatsu made for adults that they have a bigger budget than child-centric ones, which is great. But at the same time, the charm is still felt by the familiar suit action we all know and love still being present. Sure, it may be more quote-unquote gritty and realistic depictions when compared to more conventional tokus, but keep in mind that these productions are still made under limited budgets too. The people making these shows know this. They are people who are well versed in more standard tokusatsu, so they both know what they're getting into when signing onto these shows, as well as intentionally keeping some of the elements so closely linked to the medium. If only for the sake of it would just be strange to not have them, even if they're being adapted for a different target audience, a lot of these being restricted by the budget. Tokusatsu productions may be low budget, but they certainly are not low effort. It takes a great amount of talent and skill from the staff to work around the intrinsic and unavoidable budgetary restraints of working in this medium, and yet still create endearing products that engage us, entertain us, intrigue us, amaze us, inspire us. While yes, compromises will have been made along the way, a director's vision of a certain scene may not be possible, or the executives won't allow for something they deem too pricey to happen. But the bottom line is that there are still stories, characters, emotions, and action presented to us on screen for us to watch. We all have our own reasons for being fans of Tokusatsu. You may be nostalgic for the medium. You may have an interest in seeing what creative people can do with limited resources. You may be a creative yourself looking for inspiration for your own personal work. Or you may simply be someone who just doesn't care about the obvious low budget and just enjoy the stories being told. Whatever the case may be, accepting the lower budget is just the agreement we knowingly accept going in. One reason may be the hook, but you stay attached to the shows for many more reasons, the least of which being the budget. Heck, the amount of people both in Japan and around the world creating their own indie tokus with even less budget than what Toei or Subaraya work with is super admirable, and clearly shows how lack of funds cannot truly stop those passionate enough. I mean, if any of us really cared that much about the budget of a toku, then we probably wouldn't even be watching them, and instead just be consuming more mainstream big Hollywood scale productions that are sorta like them. Even then, to a certain sector of people, the budget is the deciding factor as to whether or not they'll watch something. If they took one look at Tokusatsu, even the ones with increased budget from the norm, they will be pretty unimpressed and not want to watch. I'm not here to call anyone out over that or anything. I'm just saying. So, do Tokusatsu budgets matter? To me, no. As I've made clear throughout this video, there are many more aspects that make up a Tokusatsu production that are ultimately more important than the finances. I can enjoy something like Hilo just as much as Shin Kamen Rider if they're fun and interesting. If the ideal world of someone who won the DGP IRL was specifically one giving Toku Productions unlimited budgets, that would be pretty rad. But to be honest, some of the reasons we all like to watch Toku may be lost if the sky was the limit. Even despite how cool it could be, would it actually be something we want?